Okay, so it's already 5 o'clock, 5 past 2 actually. So I think it is time to tell you good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ivanka Martinova, and it is my pleasure to welcome you tonight to the webinar organized by the International Institute for Migration and Security Research. The Institute is a non-partisan think tank and a scientific organization, which scope is to generate fact-based analysis and widen perspectives on current security issues. Negotiation is present in our daily life. And in the globalization era, we are interacting with many people with different cultural and religious backgrounds. Very often, this interaction is in form of negotiation. Needless to say, culture shapes our subjective world, and knowledge about the culture of the others will help us easier set disputes and reach agreements. So today we will be introduced to the amazing world of negotiation in the Arab culture, or as the speaker calls it, the powerful mystery of simplicity. Within the next 45 minutes, we will explore intercultural negotiations, the religion of Islam and negotiations, the concept of honor in Islam, the time concept in the Middle East, and the concept of patience, as well as the concept of vengeance in Islam and the Sulha, the ancient and brilliant conflict resolution mechanism. At the end of the session, we will have time for discussion and questions and answers. And our guide in the powerful mystery of simplicity will be Mr. Avner Saar. Mr. Saar is a senior vice president at the IIMSR. He is a prominent expert in crisis negotiations with more than 30 years of military service in the finance, special operations, field intelligence, and reconnaissance units in Israel. He has rich experience in tactical and strategic police intelligence, years of active work as a lead crisis negotiator in evolving and ongoing terror, hostage, and other crisis situations. Mr. Saar is a scholar with expanded research experience and a Ph.D. candidate in Muslim negotiations techniques. He is international lecturer in crisis negotiations, theory of practice, and teaching in university courses, seminars, conferences, and other workshops. And just before giving the floor to Mr. Saar, I would like to point some technical details. So as we mentioned, the presentation will last around 40-45 minutes. For the comfort of all of the participants, we ask you to mute your microphones during the presentation. And to have in mind that this presentation will be recorded. So if you have any privacy concerns, you are most welcome to switch off your cameras or rename yourself. At the end of the presentation, we will have the questions and answers session. So you can leave your comments in the chat section. And depending on the time, we will get into as many as possible of the questions that you leave. And just before giving the floor to Mr. Saar, I would like to thank you in advance for your interest and presence tonight, and to acknowledge the attendance of the President of IIMSR, Commander Eyal Pinko, the Vice President Lev Topor, Dr. Lev Topor, and the founder and chairman of IIMSR, Colonel Amir Goren. Mr. Saar, the virtual floor is yours. It's our pleasure. Thank you very much.
Okay. Hello and good evening to all of you. It's a great pleasure for me to be again with the IIMSR here in the webinar. Let me first give my thanks to Dr. Eyal Pinko, Dr. Lev Topor, and Ivanka for helping me in coming into this webinar. So thank you very much for that. Just a few words before we begin with the actual presentation. Whatever you're going to hear today, this afternoon, is based on my humble knowledge and on my experience, field experience, and the courses that I've been through in my life and the events. Usually, the things will be shown in the most natural way. It's based on facts, and it's arguable. I will not be able to tell you everything, all the solutions to all the situations that negotiation can bring to us as a challenge, but you will see a very deep look into the great world of Islam and the way they deal with negotiations and what is the simple things they use in order to make big profits while they do so. So please feel free to write questions and also to not agree with me, because my first slide usually in negotiation is that people are unexpectable, and that is happening in every kind of negotiation. So I wish you all a very pleasant 45 minutes, and thank you for joining us. Let's begin. Our webinar today will include a bit of the Islamic history and trade, because you cannot defer anything. Islam is all together. It's the religion, the politics, the trade, the education. So it's all one thing together. The second thing will be the traditional and cultural Islamic negotiation concepts. What are the main things that they use, how they use it? Honor and vengeance, which is quite a very deep cultural aspect and concept and value in the Middle East. We'll see how they deal with it and how we can use it into our favor. Another thing is the patience, which is one of the greatest of their power, the tolerance and emotions. The emotions play a great deal while you talk about collective societies. Collective societies are based on emotions because they are very hierarchical. So when it comes into negotiation, you have to pay a lot of attention to the emotions that people are carrying with them. It could be fear, frustration, vengeance. It could be a sadness. It could be loss of lives. It could be any kind of anxiety and fear from other things. But it's also part in a negotiation. When I spoke to people along the process of negotiation from the Palestinian Authority and also from the Israeli side, I could see that the emotions took quite a big part in their, even in their decisions, but it accompanied them all the way to the negotiations. And even in the end, they didn't know what's going to be. Nobody knows what's going to be, but emotions are a great part in negotiations. We will talk about also in few words about the Sulha. Sulha, for those who know, and for those who hear it for the first time, it's a conflict resolution mechanism, which is based in the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia, and it's very old. It's about 3,500 years, and it's working until today in a beautiful way. The tools that they use were actually the main focus of my research, to understand what is the Sulha as a mechanism, how does it work so good, and how does it work so many years in between the Arabs themselves and the tribes themselves, but also in between others. When I say others, with all the respect to the Muslims, I mean to the non-Muslims. So we'll go over the Sulha mechanism, and we'll see the case study with King Hussein, that he used all the tools that the Sulha is using in order to solve a crisis situation, diplomatic issue in between Israel and Jordan. Well, honor. Honor is a very, very deep thing that regards all the world. And there is a big question whether the honor is only belong to the Middle East. And the answer is no, because when you research about the search for honor for the Irish people, or for the Scottish people, or for the English people, or other European countries, you see that honor is a very deep value. But let me tell you something that will help you understand regarding negotiation. What is the meaning of honor? Honor is something that you don't get yourself. The difference is in between the collective societies and the individual societies. And tonight we are talking about the collective society. Collectivist societies usually get the honor from the outside, and that's what they fight for. This is why once you get it from the outside, you have to remember that in negotiation, everything is outside. You have announcements, and you have people that are talking, delegations in between them, and the honor plays a great role. Actually, it's so important that sometimes it's just the target in order to get things back through negotiation to regain the honor. I can tell you that there are many phrases and fables in Arabic which say, you can do anything to me, but you cannot touch my honor. And usually when I spoke with the people that were in very hard situations, I mean, the event that I managed at the time, they expected me to keep the honor all the time. No matter what happened, the nice way of talking, the kindness, to refrain from saying bad things about them or about their family, the tribe, even the area, even the Islamic Ummah. So honor is, I put it on top because it's going into every other article that I've written in this slide. The trust and confidence. This concept regarding the confidence in the Middle East is very different from what we understand. Usually, and I'm not talking, I cannot make generalization to 7 billion people in the world, but usually in the West, when you meet people, there is some basic confidence that you give, and there is a confidence that stays in between the people. In the Middle East, the basic is that there is no confidence until something different has been proven. It's not possible to gain trust just because you meet, or just because you smile to each other, or just because you brought a very nice present to the person. It's something that takes time to build. And let me share with you a short story that last year I was asked by an Arabic company to give them some advice, and I was there for about 4 hours. And in the end, when the manager collected all of us, there were 4 Arabs workers, and he said very nice words to every one of them, and they deserved it. But when he got to me, he said, I don't know you well enough, and I'm sure we are on the right way. What he meant is that I still don't know you, even though the 4 hours passed beautifully. So that means that while conducting negotiations, it takes time to build the trust and the confidence. There is a tool called CBM, and we will expand a bit on the next slide. The CBM is the confidential building measures. That's what it stands for, the abbreviation. And the CBM is actually a tool that we use in order to get the trust and the confidence with Arab and Muslims a bit faster. But still, remember, it takes time. A word about the Arabic language. One of the things that along my research I came across with that usually when people that don't talk in Arab, they use it in English. They use the English, sometimes French, but the English is a language which is, I don't want to say totally, but it's very different from Arabic. First of all, Arabic has much more words and much more meaning. And let me share with you one thing about the language. Arabic language is a high context language, which means that when you say a word, a phrase, a sentence, which for you, as someone who doesn't speak Arabic, don't know much, or you just understand what it means, it's not that. The high context, it says something completely different, or to the positive or to the negative, but the high context is like saying the things and you have to understand yourself. I will make it more clear. When a ruler, when the president in the Middle East is talking to the people, he doesn't say much, he doesn't menace, he doesn't threat, but in his words, people understand what he's saying. This is called a high context language. Why it is mentioned here in my presentation? Because there is a lot of difference when you write the same agreement and when you write even messages and you get the answer in English and whether you get the answer in Arabic. So the tool for that is to learn Arabic, of course, but also there are many people that are very professional in this issue and aspect, and that's where they should be used. The reasons to negotiate. Well, there is a thing called Sharia, which means the way of life in Islam. Sharia includes everything. It's the way, what you do in the morning, what you do every hour, how you pray, and even how you negotiate. And I can tell you that the researchers from Malaysia and from the Far East are full of evidence from the Sharia, from the Quran, from the Sirah, from other academic historic sources that are saying that it's all combined together. Now, we negotiate usually when we want something. It could be in trade, it could be after wartime, it could be in crisis situation, and it could be in a diplomatic way. But I've managed to give you a deep look into the reasons that the Arabs are basically negotiating for, and when this is coming into being conducted. So the reasons to negotiate is when there is a military weakness, which is called in Arabic du'uf. Once you don't have enough power, then you negotiate. The second thing is that the field distance, there is no proximity. There is a very far way in order to join the war. It's called il-bu'ud, so you don't negotiate for that when it's far away from you. And force majeure, nazle, something happened and you have to negotiate. Lack of meal supply, which is called a kille. And the last thing is the fear from a total destruction, al-halaq, which is the last article regarding the reasons to negotiate. Let me tell you something that might surprise you all. We are going back to 1229. We are talking about Tel El Ajul near Jaffa. Jaffa is near Tel Aviv in Israel. There was an agreement, a peace agreement signed by Frederick II from Germany. He was a crusader. with Malik al-Kamel. And Malik al-Kamel decided to make a peace agreement for 10 years because of two reasons. He had a meal weakness, and by the way, that was his brother who he was fighting, not the Crusaders, but he was weak at that time, and he had not much supply to fight, so he gave the Crusaders, the Christians, a total responsibility and ownership on Jerusalem, on full Jerusalem, besides the Temple Mount and the Masjid al-Aqsa, which is the Mosque of Aqsa. Besides those two things, the negotiations happened then, and that was the result, which is something that once you read the news today are considered to be almost impossible to really happen. Time perception. Time perception in the Middle East is an interesting thing, really. The time is given from God, and the time is counted by event. It's polychronic time. It's a polychronic time. Polychronic time, it means that the event is what determines the time for any event. Let me explain to you. We usually live under the monochronic time, which means that if I have to speak with Dr. Pinko or Dr. Lev Topo, we are 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Suppose 2 minutes late, I'll be angry, and it can create something that is a bit unpleasant for both of us. But the event time is a time that people are living according to the time the event needs. Suppose you have a meeting, and my friends here that I can see in the pictures here, remember that when we were in India as a delegation from IIMSR, the plan was that we have to stay until 4 o'clock in the afternoon, but because there were things that were interesting and the talks and the conversations were flowing in the right way, we stayed there until 7. So it was not ruled by the time, it was ruled by the event. Let me tell you another story about it. There was one guy from Al-Qaeda that gave an interview once in Switzerland, and Switzerland is well known for the watches. And it's a long interview, but what is interesting and regarding our subject now is that he said, well, you, the Swiss people, you have the most accurate and punctual watches in the world. But let me tell you that we are the Muslims, we have all the time in the world. So that means that it's a different concept. Suppose I made during the time that I was working in East Jerusalem and I had to meet someone, it was not the time that we meet. It was like, I'm going to see my family and then I'm going to pray. And after I'll be in the mosque, I'll meet you. But he didn't say the time because he never knows what exactly the time will take or the event will take. And the last thing, let me tell you about the time perception is when Israel had to fight the negotiation with the Hamas, Israel stood with the seconds and watches, and it was all broadcasted on TV, and we were counting the days. By the way, he was 1,941 days in jail, the Gilad Shalit, the soldier. But one of the powers of Hamas regarding that point was that they saw it as a one event, and the event and the time is given from God. So we are not to interrupt it. we let it happen. And this gives a lot of power to the other side, especially in crisis negotiations, but we have no time to expand it in this webinar. About the haggle. The haggle is the bargain. The bargaining is a cultural tool used in the Middle East and Africa as well. Bargaining is something that is usually creates uncomfort, because it's as if you want so much or you don't want to pay. You could be considered a miser, you could be considered unkind. So what is the bargain in the Middle East? First of all, bargaining is a tool to meet people. It's a cultural tool. Once you bargain, you learn the person. Once you bargain, the person that is standing in front of you is actually respecting you with his time. He is at your place. Now, the conversation, let's say it's a high opening, as in negotiation, it's a high opening. The high opening is something that it's just there to respect the place and the owner. And we are going back to the owner now. And the thing is that if you bargain, you actually giving the other side a feel of respect. And I remember one of the professors from Haifa University, which he was an Arab Muslim, one of the wisest person I ever met. He flew to Sweden, and he said to me when he got back, it's not possible to see people that when you buy things, you actually give the money. Nobody is talking to you. You cannot say anything about the price. You just give something from plastic. They run it, and that's it. He said it's a very bad culture because people don't get to know each other. And he was a professor and a very wise one. Let me share with you now, please, a short clip. And by the help of Dr. Pinko, I hope I'm going to do this well. Sorry for that. Sorry for that. It just it's a beautiful piece of film from the haggle, the bargaining, and he's asking him to bargain because he won't sell it unless he bargains. About the attrition. Attrition is a tool in for many other forces in the world, but of course Israel and other countries know that attrition is and weakening is a part of a way in order to gain more, I would say, results, better results in the end. And attrition regarding negotiation is a very common thing. Is a very common thing to do. I can tell you that just from Professor Moshe Sharon that wrote the Middle Eastern Bazaar, he said that one of the things that he learned in Egypt was that you go into a shop, and once you, let's say you want to buy carpet, but you start to speak with the owner of the shop on something else, and once he lost a lot of power, then you start to talk to him about the real thing you want to buy, and this is called attrition weakening. by the way, as far as negotiation is concerned, is that you can bargain and make things longer about things that are not important. That is called frogs, to throw frogs into the negotiation. And that's how to gain probably more in the end. Doesn't always work, but worth thinking about. About patience. Patience is a great deal, I think, for every religion and every culture. There is a saying in Arabic which says, Inna ala ma'al sabarin wa inna ma sabaru kafar, which means that God is with those who are patient, and if they are not patient, they are considered to be infidels. Well, patience is one of the great things and powers. And when we talk about the simple things about the Muslims, this is it. It's the patience. It's the way they see things. Let me share with you a short story regarding a research that happened in professors and doctors in Israel and in Amman University in Jordan. The question was, suppose it would take 60 years until Jordan and Israel will sit down and write a peace agreement. What do you think about it? And I'm talking now about the Israeli side regarding the patience. The Israelis said it doesn't look as if they want to have peace. And then they said, well, people that are waiting 60 years for that cannot be considered serious. Probably there's no need for them to make peace. And they mostly didn't like it. Now let's go to Jordan. This is very interesting. They said that regarding 60 years of waiting to make the peace process and the sign with Israel, it's one of the greatest things they heard of, because in the 60 years, you have enough time to learn the enemy or the adversary. In the 60 years, you can always pull back. In the 60 years, you can find the better time to sign, because once you sign, maybe you could get something better within 20 years. And they said, we accept it and we want it. Patience is one of the basic element in negotiations, especially in crisis negotiation, but also in diplomatic. People tend to have things right away and now. This is not the Middle Eastern style, and this is not, it doesn't belong to the Middle East. And I suggest and recommend you that before you go into any negotiations, think that they see it different. The TPI. TPI is a third-party interpreter. It's called like a mediator. Now, this thing is a very important tool in the Middle East, and the question is why? I can tell you that I'm in touch now with the doctor from Bar-Ilan University, and we are running a research regarding what is the type, the prototype of someone to be considered a TPI in the world, not just in between that country or the other. What is a third-party person? And I want you to know that it's very hard to get to any conclusion, because the third-party interpreter has to be like the son of, I don't know what, of God, in order to be neutral, in order to be wise, in order to absorb all the anger, in order to find the right solution to intractable conflicts, in order to bring peace to places in the world. So what is exactly the meaning of mediator? But the reason it's so important in the Middle East is, just think about it. Let's go back to the article number 1, which is the honor. Using the mediator let you a way to keep your honor. Let me explain how. Suppose I had a fight with Dr. Lev Topor, which I believe he will win anyway. But suppose I have this problem with him, and there is someone that is coming as a mediator in between us. So I don't have to forsake, to give, to be weak to Dr. Lev Topor. I do this with my eyes to the TPI. And that's why the TPI can use much more to gain more from both sides, because it's like, I don't lose face, I don't lose my honor, and if I did, it was not in the face of my adversary. So the way I see it, that the TPI is a great thing. It's beyond my knowledge and experience, I have to admit, because once I'm being asked questions, how do you complete it? How do you define it? What are the main prototype characteristics? It's very hard to answer that, but it's working in the Middle East, and every conflict in the Middle East is actually being solved by the TPI and the mediators. Once we are going into collectivist society, we are expecting an hierarchical negotiation approach. You should remember that the collectivist society are living from zero in hierarchical families, and hierarchy, everyone knows, creates respect and honor to the one above you, like in the army and like in tribes and like everywhere. So also in negotiation, even when the delegation is coming or the people you meet, you have to remember that they are representatives, most likely not people that can take decisions. And I'm talking about now diplomatic, because there are other, in trade and merchants, it's different. Not always, but it's different. So you have to remember that there is an hierarchy, and they cannot take decisions from themselves, and they have to consult, which is quite the same with the others. The holistic religious involvement. We cannot separate the respected Islam religion from anything that is happening in the world. It could be studies, it could be living, it could be marriage, divorce, it could be 24 hours a day as a Muslim. The religious involvement is very, very critical. Let me tell you regarding negotiation that Israel signed a peace agreement with Israel in '79, and Anwar Sadat came to the Knesset and even gave a lecture and even spoke in the Knesset. Let me tell you that he didn't do it unless he got from Al-Haq, from Al-Azhar University, which is the highest religious Islamic university in the world, and the second one is in Saudi Arabia. And he was said that Anwar Sadat, the president, you can do the negotiation and sign the agreement with Israel, because if we are leaning on 628, your next move is fine, because Muhammad the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as they say, because Muhammad the Prophet has done the same. And he wouldn't be able to do that without the involvement of the religious people, because it would be like to go against Islam. This is something that it's not possible for him. He was murdered for a few years ago. He was murdered for one of the reasons is the sign with Israel for the peace agreement, but he was killed for that. As for the religion, I can tell you that I've interviewed many people. Some of them, and I have to say the truth, some of them said, from both sides, by the way, from the Israelis and the Palestinian authorities, they said something very interesting. They said, we need the religion to be behind us, but they are not always there for us. Sometimes they opposing our opinions, and sometimes they ask us and they expect from us to do the other things. Now, I'll tell you that the religion, now recently Israel has signed with Bahrain and in Dubai the Abraham Pact, and which is based on someone like the father for the three great religion, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So it was kind of a nice context to the religion, and I love the name, the Abraham Pact Accords. The religious people are very active in many ways. They are active in the Sulha, which we'll talk about in the next slide. And they are also active in and against when you talk about interstate negotiations. So it's a very big part, because just imagine that religious Jews and religious Muslims, high clergy, would stand and say something together. What is the influence on the people in order to gain the legitimacy to go to negotiations and, of course, to sign an agreement? And it's a great, great challenge. I know that many thoughts are coming up to your head now, but this is a tool. Believe me, it's a tool. I will tell you a few words, okay, because it's a great, I would say, analysis about the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. The Treaty of Hudaybiyah is the prototype idea of how to negotiate. And I can tell you that in many cases in the world, as I mentioned in 1229 in Tel El Ajul, they signed it for 10 years, and then they expanded it for another 4 years. It was, or 14 years. But the Treaty of Hudaybiyah was signed in between Muhammad, the Prophet, and his own people from Mecca, the Quraysh. And the Quraysh didn't want him to go back, because he wanted to make an Umrah. And Umrah is when you go as a pilgrim to Mecca. And then they signed the agreement, which is called the Hudaybiyah, the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. And one of the articles said it will be for 10 years. And they did not allow Muhammad to write there as a prophet, only Muhammad ibn Abdullah. And there were also many little articles, but the negotiations were very tough. And I just want to say that Muhammad the Prophet was a great negotiator. He was a merchant, and he had with the Jews and with other parts in Saudi Arabia, beautiful negotiations that actually became the prototype to the Islamic Arabic world. The Treaty of Hudaybiyah, after to conquer Mecca, and he found a reason that one of his, and then he conquered Mecca, and the rest is history. Got from Morocco in the west to China in the east. Agreement until today, when we talk about negotiation during the 90s in South Africa, Arafat, that he made peace with the Oslo Accords, but people were angry at Arafat, and he said in Arabic to all the world, Lam tunsa itifaq Hudaybiyah, which means don't forget the Hudaybiyah Treaty, because it means I can get from it, and I'm not entitled to it all my life. I will tell you just a few words about the Sulha, because we are running out of time. The Sulha mechanism is something that still working today. There is a crisis, and this is something unbelievable. I was part of the delegations as a mediator a few years, and you could see people that are in the feelings and emotions from vengeance and this mechanism brings them into the forgiveness. Let me share with you one of the things that the research has come to is that in the West, we don't usually use the forgiveness or the forgiveness process in between the countries. And this is something that I see as a lack of understanding. In any case that I remember, like let's say, Northern Ireland and England, the process of forgiveness was not strong enough. And here I can show you a mechanism that is working for millions and millions, that it's bringing from people that want to kill in return as a vengeance to forgiveness. The first step is that you go to the mediators and you actually ask them to intervene and to stop the killing. Then you bring the atwa. The atwa is like a CBM. If you remember that, and I connect it to the first slide, CBM is a confidential building measure. You offer them some money, and then if they get it, it's like they want to come into peace. There is the negotiations, which is one of the things that I researched most for the last 3 years, is the negotiations of the people in the Sulha. And the people in the Sulha are champions of the world because they bring people from wanna kill to be together. And Musayara is a tool that where you use beautiful words in any situation in order to bring the other side to feel good. And you observe his anger and you actually make a reciprocity in order to establish rapport. It's amazing. It's really nice. The mediators' activity is step by step. They don't usually come and they want to finish the problem, the conflict. It can take months, but once it's happening, there is no one is allowed to kill at that time because it's like a white flag. Dahia is a compensation money, and this is something very smart. Let me take you up here to the title that I've written, the Sulha solution. There is nothing like it in the world. Think about it. It's a solution that is in turn, it's solving the economical part because the daya, the compensation money, is based on what is the worth, how worth the man was. If he was 16 and he could work until he's 60, so you pay a lot. If he was 54, you pay less. It depends on his stance, on his status, or the family. It depends on many things, but one of the art of the negotiators, it's called Lijan Jahat, they are capable of saying the right amount of money that someone is worth, and then you finish the problem, the conflict, economically, juridically, and socially. Just think about it. It's something that you don't realize, but it's happening. It's much more solid than any other mechanism that I came across with. But still, I learned a lot from that, usually in the negotiation side. The role of the woman is after there is the ceremony. The ceremony is very public. Everybody should be there because it's like all of them are evident to what is happening, and you cannot break it because you break your respect and honor of your own family and people in the village. Let me tell you just one thing with your permission, ladies and gentlemen. In 1997, there was a massacre in Aram Naharaim between the Israeli and the Jordan border. The event was terrible because one of the Jordanian soldiers opened fire and killed 7 girls. And here I just want you to see something. We were talking about the Sulha and its power and the way you solve it, like we were talking about only in the societies, only in the Islamic Arabic societies. Now I want to tell you a story, short one, which shows King. King Hussein was very much loved in Israel. And they say a joke that he could have been elected as an Israeli president. And King Hassan in 1997 got a message that one of his soldiers killed 7 girls. And just want you to see what he did. Within 2 days, King Hassan came to each house of the victims. Now listen to that. He kneeled down, he went down on his knees and asked for pardon, which is the forgiveness process. He also paid compensation to each family. And he also left an open door for them, like because it happened because of the Jordanian soldiers. So he left an open door. And that's how he solved, I would say, political or diplomatic thing. And I see it as a very noble way that a king would come down and kneel in the house of the victims. And Israel really shed tears when they saw the king doing so. And there was a lot of love towards I just want to say something generally to conclude the massive world that I came across with within the last hour. This act of negotiation regarding the Middle East is too big. There are so many issues and articles that it's really amazing to see the way it's happening. I'll just share with you that what I've done in my research is that I have managed to gain all the tools the Sulha is using, and I've managed to create a model that with the model you can actually use the tools to make better chances in negotiation with the respected Arab Muslims, Middle Easterns. And I really hope that this is going to work. So thank you very much for listening. And now, if someone wants to ask a question.
Mr. Saar, as usual, you had a fascinating presentation, and I personally didn't feel when almost an hour passed. So as we are running a bit out of time, we probably can take 1 or 2 questions. Here in the chat section was going during the time of your presentation some conversation. Also, Dr. Topor shared a link of the video that we were not able to run. So for those who would like to see this part, you can click on the link. And if there are no specific questions, we can move to the closing remarks. Once again, I would like to thank you all for just. Let me see again the chat section if I'm not missing something. Amazing. Okay, so I'd like to thank you for your amazing presentation, Mr. Saar, and for your insights and valuable input. And we hope that this event contributed to a better understanding of the topic of all our participants today. Mr. Saar is providing amazing presentations and teachings and trainings in the field of negotiations, and I personally had the pleasure to attend some of them with a lot of simulations, and it's really fascinating how deep is the field of negotiation, and we encourage you to attend more events like this one attended by organized by IIMSR. You can follow us on our social media channels and check the recent updates on our website IIMSR.eu. And once again, thank you very much for your attention. Stay safe and see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.